Former President Donald Trump released a 12-page rebuttal following day 2 of the House Select Committee's hearings about January 6, 2021. Calling the committee a, quote, kangaroo court, he also said it was Democrats' way of distracting Americans from the problems plaguing the nation and the establishment's way of keeping him from running for president in 2024. Here's a bit of what he wrote. Quote, as we near the midterm elections, we're watching the swamp creatures circle the drain as true Americans step up to replace the corrupt establishment with patriots who will fight for our freedoms. The establishment is holding on as tightly as they can to their power as they watch it slip from their grasp.
The House Select Committee has been investigating the events to the Capitol riot, specifically what role Donald Trump played in it. Democratic strategist Kristal Knight and White House reporter at Real Clear Politics, Philip Wegmann, are here with us to weigh in. Welcome.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
All right. So we heard a lot of folks among the leftist crowd say, no one's going to watch this. Nothing really matters. Obviously, there are people who are sympathetic to Trump who, for very different reasons, said very similar things. And I wonder, let's start with you, Kristal. Are you surprised by the way the hearings have been conducted and what the public reception has been so far?
No, I'm not surprised. I think, the first night, which was last Thursday, there were 20 million people who tuned in. I think that it's smart on the hearings or the committee's behalf to air that in prime time so that as many Americans can tune in and really understand what unfolded, how, where, and when it happened. I'm not also surprised by people's reaction. I think lots of Americans who maybe saw clips or heard, hearing their pieces of the actual events, they were able to see unseen footage that really unfolded, and it showed the gravity of just how uncivil this unrest unfolded at the Capitol. And so I think that the committee has done a good job with really just showing the interviews as they took place over the last 18 months so that many Americans can hear from their own ears and determine what they believe is the truth. And really, we can get beyond this point and not have to have this type of insurrection, this type of failed coup happen again, because the facts are being laid out before everyone to watch.
What are the kind of facts? And maybe I'll put this to you, Philip. Is there new stuff here that you think is going to change people's minds about what happened? Because I saw, I think it was in the New York Times, maybe yesterday or today, David French, I believe, was writing that, he lives in a heavily red part of the country, and when he talks to his neighbors, there's a real information gap between the things that the average Republican knows and the things that the average Democrat knows, and that there are real substantive details about what happened around 1/6 and the lead up to 1/6 that people who are perhaps disinterested or don't believe that it was really a problem, it's just really a knowledge and information gap. Does that gel with your experience, and do you think any of these hearings will start to close that gap?
I'm not sure if David French is the best barometer for opinions outside of the Beltway. Certainly all of us read his columns. But, setting that aside, I think that what the January 6th committee is doing currently, and we're going to find out if there are more details, certainly that there have been some, but these are comprehensive hearings. What they're essentially doing is they're packaging a lot of the things that we already knew. For instance, there's testimony from the former Attorney General Bill Barr, where he, in no uncertain terms, called some of these allegations that the election was stolen BS. I don't think that the Trump White House thought that that's what they were getting in the deal when they quote unquote activated Bill Barr. But he said, look, these claims about a stolen election that they did not have merit. And the January 6th committee, what they essentially were able to do was package that in a way that it could be seen, outside of just the Beltway. That the 20 million Americans who tuned into this were going to be able to hear that message, despite the fact that this is something that Barr has been saying since at least last December, I think, when he detailed a lot of that in his latest autobiography. So I don't know if this is going to break through the noise and you're going to have suburban moms at soccer practices talking about what happened 16 months ago at the Capitol versus the gas prices that they're paying, earlier that afternoon. That said, again, what the committee is accomplishing is they are putting all of this information together in a more digestible package that people can at least access more easily.
Philip, what impact do you think this has, if any, on sort of the dynamics that we'll continue to see going forward among the right? I think, we're gearing up for midterms and for really interesting splits to sort of emerge. There's definitely from the Trumpy diehards, there's a lot of Liz Cheney directed hate. What dynamic inter-party do you think this has? Or what effect?
It's interesting, because you started the segment a little bit ago by reading from Trump's rebuttal, where he essentially says the establishment is doing this because they don't want me to run in 2024. And the thing is, he's right. I mean, regardless of how you define the establishment. The thing is, though, whether it was going to be focusing on the riot at the Capitol or focusing on the chaos of the pandemic, the establishment, however you define them, certainly doesn't want Trump to get back into this. And they would be talking about a different kind of chaos, maybe relitigating the impeachment trials rather than the violence of that day if he hadn't said, all right, well, I'm going to walk down there to the Capitol with you. So I don't think it's necessarily, super helpful to parse motives here. But to your question about the midterms, the reason why I think this is relevant is you have all of these Republicans who are, they're more than eager to beat Joe Biden up fairly or unfairly on every challenge that the country is facing. And now with January 6th, you're not just having a re-examination of what happened on that day. You're having a relitigation of the former presidency, and at a moment when Republicans are eager to really stick it to the White House to take advantage of the fact that I think 71% of the country says we're heading in the wrong direction. Trump is saying, yeah, this is because Democrats, that they don't want to focus on all those challenges, and it's also because, that they hate me. He has inserted himself into the mix, and I'm not certain that that's necessarily a value add for Republicans who want to take back Congress.
Well, Philip, to your point, Trump continues to claim election fraud, which is false. A star witness in yesterday's hearing was none other than his former Attorney General, Bill Barr. Here is what Bill Barr had to say.
I told him that the stuff that his people were shoveling out to the public was bullshit. I mean, that the claims of fraud were bullshit. And, he was indignant about that.
Some of the notable moments included when Wyoming Congresswoman Liz Cheney said Trump took advice on election results from a, quote, inebriated Rudy Giuliani. And perhaps equally, if not more shocking, was the revelation that Trump and one of his PACs profited off of election conspiracy theories to the tune of $250 million. What do you guys think of these revelations? Kristal, I'll pose the question to you.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that his innermost circle really told him that there were no claims of election fraud. There was no evidence of election fraud, but yet they still allowed this coup, this plan of the big lie and the plan of the coup to move forward. So those are two of the big questions that I have to ask Mark Meadows and other folks who were around him. If you absolutely knew that there was no evidence of election fraud, why did you allow the president to continue pushing this lie? And other Republicans, quite frankly, continue to push this lie. Further, why did you allow the president to move forward with inciting a riot, with encouraging people to go and storm the Capitol, if you knew, again, that there was no evidence of election fraud? So I don't think that the president is the only person that's liable in this situation. There are many other people who were responsible, just as responsible as he was, although he is the sitting president. But to know and to discover through these hearings that so many people told the president no, knew that there was no evidence of election fraud, and yet all of these things continue to take place, that is deeply disturbing, not only for what happened, but also for members of Congress who participated or had some allegiance to this president during that time.
I'm glad you brought up Meadows, because I think one of the really interesting revelations was not only Meadows' a degree of knowledge and sort of complicitness in this, but then also the testimony they collected from Ivanka Trump, who was also very much admitting to this big lie. And I'm very curious to see what types of consequences in public life and in political life these people will incur. I should hope that there should be some extremely significant squandered credibility, but I don't want to be overly optimistic when looking at the state of the current GOP. So.
Yeah, I think it depends on if they decide to kind of forcefully, more explicitly come out against Donald Trump. I think we've seen that Democrats will rehabilitate and give an MSNBC show to almost anybody who's critical of Donald Trump. They're trying to make Liz Cheney president now, a Democratic
the Ivanka Trump MSNBC slot. What do you think of that, Philip? How do you think this is going to play out going forward?
Yeah, I'm not sure if MSNBC is Ivanka's speed, but this is something that's really interesting, right? You have this entire slate of people who were in the administration, and from their testimony, it's clear that they should have known better. But that is sort of undercut, right, by the testimony from Liz Cheney, that soundbite from Liz Cheney where she says, well, a clearly inebriated Rudy Giuliani. And the reason I say that is it's almost like, are we going to note that, this was kind of nefarious and there were people who, should have said something but didn't, or was it just, not this big, mastermind plan, but instead, a lawyer who's past his prime and has dipped too much into the Pinot. And so it's sort of a question of like, is this a cunning villain or just an incompetent fool? But the thing here that I think actually is really interesting is, maybe David French has a take on what these people in flyover country might say, but they might not be following all of the questions about insurrection or who did what when. But that question about who profited from this, I think that if you just sort of gut check people on the basic question of, is it fair for, the former president to have raised these hundreds of millions of dollars ostensibly for a legal defense fund, but maybe that money wasn't used for a defense fund or to combat some of these concerns about the election. That's something that I think will make people angry, even if they are just tuning in ever so casually to these hearings.
I think that's a good point, Philip. Philip, Kristal, we appreciate you being here with us today.
Thank you.
And we will be back with more Rising after this.